If I might just come in on process innovation, a bank like ours, HSBC, does 50% of its IT development and BPO work, and the BPO work is all about process. So the contribution that comes from really making sure that our processes are reinvented and universal across the group really happen right here, and that is innovation at every level. So the role therein, and it's not just about cost, it's value addition at every level, happens right here. Also, product innovation, which happens around consumer markets that are emerging markets. There's a large market like India contributes a lot to the Pan-Asian region, and I see how we actually lift certain products and introduce them into markets which are smaller but similar in terms of being emerging markets.
Yeah, actually I want to quote one example from the book. That's also my way of showing I read the book. Ravi talks about this dual SIM phone. And I think that's an amazing innovation. I really don't know who invented the dual SIM phone, but it makes absolute sense for India because A, if you have two SIMs in your phone, then different areas have different cell phone coverage or quality of signals, so you could switch your usage. B, it helped because roaming charges were very high and you could use a phone based on where you were. And C, because there were lots of new mobile companies that were offering special deals, you could keep one number constant for incoming calls and keep changing the other SIM because you could get a special deal. So it sounds like a very Indian innovation to me. But the fact is that if you're a mobile phone designer sitting in Helsinki or Chicago or Seoul with no connect to this market, you'll say, why the hell do you need a dual SIM phone? Because in those countries, one SIM is good enough. And very often the phone comes from the mobile supplier who doesn't want two SIMs in the phone. So I think that's an example of where if you don't have your feet on the ground and your eyes and ears open, entire change in the market can completely, and that I think happened to some of the big players. So I think it's a great example of how unless you're in the market, unless you're designing with the market's peculiarities and idiosyncrasies, you run the risk of losing the whole game.
So Ravi, on innovation, you had, I saw in the entire book, and it's one of the few books that talks about innovation in India that doesn't use the term jugaad. So is jugaad innovation?
I don't know. I have an allergy towards overused words, and somewhere along the way I found that everybody was talking about jugaad. It's actually not a particularly flattering term. So it's something kludgy and cobbled together. And I think we're capable of more. And when I looked at the companies that have done well, and who I cite as breakthrough companies, I wouldn't want to describe what they've done as jugaad. Okay, so you take JCB. It was anything but jugaad. I thought at every step of the way, in their business, Vipin, I've known him for a long time. He's too modest. Their 800-pound gorilla is a company called Caterpillar. Okay. And if you look at all the decisions that they took versus what Caterpillar took, they took exactly the opposite decision, okay? So what does a successful company do? You bring your flagship product to India. So what does Caterpillar do? They bring a shiny, high-end excavator. Now it turns out there's a market for excavators, but only a handful. What you need is something pretty rugged and entry level. So they bring something called a backhoe loader, okay? So which is a very, very sort of basic model which people evolve out of and from. In that way, you'll take a machine in Europe is optimized for digging efficiency because productivity is what matters. These guys decide to optimize it for fuel efficiency because in India, fuel costs are so high. So every design element, they took a contrarian view. That's innovation. Okay, because they thought about what does the market need, not how do I sell more of what do I make. And this was true of all the companies. That's why I didn't want to sort of use the word jugaad and something that's cobbled together crudely. I thought it was extremely sophisticated and clear thinking that resulted in an offering and a business model that made great sense. I think it's true of Maggi noodles as well.
Yeah. Nobody's perfect, so I'm Brazilian, and we have our word for jugaad, which is jeitinho. And I agree with you, Ravi. I think we tend to use that more in a negative way. Pejorative, yeah.
Yeah.
In a pejorative way, which in fact the jugar or jeitinho, which is the Portuguese word for jugar, it's something positive, but the way it's used is pejorative, because there's one thing I have learned in India. Maybe I was already educated in Brazil, is that here everything is possible.
But isn't a very important...
Everything is possible. It might take a little bit longer. It might take a way to get there, but you get things done.
Adil, I just thought it might be important here to touch on something else that Ravi mentions, and to prove I read at least some parts of the book, and that is that it's also about the culture of the organization. You can have all these wonderful insights, but a head office that doesn't listen or doesn't even allow for that entrepreneurial thinking and implementation at the local level. So it's very important when you talk particularly of multinationals that you have that conversation and ability to bring those inputs and ideas back in to a head office that permits you to innovate as you go along.
I think that's the single biggest reason that's inhibiting more innovation. Okay, too many head offices are saying, here's the answer, go sell more of it. And that's where you have to start. Of course, that's where you have to start. But at some point, you need to encourage the local team to say, what does the market need? And, you know, Vikram, I don't know how many outlets McDonald's would have had if you'd sold only beef burgers.
0.
You know, so if you hadn't empowered, his organization to create a local menu, local price points, and a business model that made money at those price points.
When I sold beef, I'm sure I wouldn't.
So I think that remains to this day the single most important barrier to more innovation.
So just on that, and of course I'll start out by saying that all of you are sitting here going to be conflicted in answering this question, but so therefore it's so much fun, right? You talk a lot about two people who are very critical to the success of these companies and what's required to be successful. One is the CEO who has vision and allows people to do things, so you know, the super CEO who can all-seeing, all-knowing, and the country manager in India who is wonderfully brilliant, knows everything about India and knows everything about the company, and can work with the company. You make that point that if you can't work with the headquarters and understand it, that doesn't really work. And are you setting such a high standard that only 5 companies can ever meet it? I mean, of course, these are all unbelievably wonderful people here, but are you setting a standard that nobody else can meet, or is this
hardly? No, all I say is that in many ways the success is the outcome of a great partnership. There are lots of people in a global company, but
be careful, you're saying these people are not special.
But it's really the sort of a product of a tango or chemistry between a competent country head and a CEO at the helm of the global company who truly gets globalization and embraces it. Okay? Now, in the beginning when I started, there were all kinds of confusion. What do you look for in a country manager? Does he or she have to be Indian? Is an expat better? What do you need? You want somebody who's got market knowledge or the headquarter relationships, etc. And obviously there are trade-offs, it's a complex situation, etc. But what I learned was nationality does not matter. Okay? It does not matter. What matters far more are certain intrinsics. What matters is this particularly, if you want the breakthrough in India, you need somebody who is trusted at the headquarters. Okay? And trust is a two-way street, it has to be earned and all that. But I gave the example. Supposing after a successful career at Microsoft, I was hired as Helio's replacement. And I said, oh, we need a new R&D center here to do R&D for local foods. What I would more than likely get is a bunch of nods, okay, but no action, no decision. But if Helio comes and says exactly the same thing, they'll be cutting a ribbon in a year. Why? Because Helio's grown up in that organization. He used to run global R&D before. he can walk into the CEO's office and, persuade him that this is not going to happen otherwise. So that level of trust in the country head is important. And if you simply have a sales guy who's been recruited from another company, it's not going to happen. Intrinsics, like you want somebody who's entrepreneurial, who's willing to take a long-term view, be in the job for 5 to 7 years, has some courage. These are important things. It doesn't seem like an impossibly high standard. It seems like sort of pretty rudimentary stuff. And what are you looking for from the global CEO? In addition to everything else you look for from a business leader, you're looking for someone who's culturally open, okay? That they may or may not have grown up in crazy places like India, but when they come here, they're curious, they're open-minded, they're willing to roll up their sleeves and go into the market and see what's out there, instead of just isolating themselves in the confines of the Taj and the corporate jet. That again doesn't seem like a particularly tall standard. But unfortunately, the way it's playing out, it's still a bit exceptional. But part of why I wrote this book is to provide a bit of a wake-up call about what it takes.
You want to comment on why it worked in your cases, and did you have a great relationship? You're brilliant.
Me again, yeah.
Nandan was the boss, so he can't answer.
Yeah, Nandan.
It helps if you started the company, huh? Every time.
Yeah.
Let's put it like that. I mean, the message that I got, there is something that you write in your book which I like very much, to prove that I read the book. Nestle had, about 10 years ago, Nestle had this obsession on China. China. So everything 10, 15 years ago. So when they asked me to come here, there was two messages. First is, learn the local business model, because I don't think we're going to win in India, or even if we are not a bad company, but really make it bigger, more, have a larger share of the business, if we don't adapt ourselves to the local business model. And the second was the make India more visible at the center. That's exactly two men, one from the CEO and the other from the chairman. And just one example on the business model, one of the things that I have learned when I arrived here, it is about land. I mean, I think the Land Act is 1,800 or something like that. We don't have yet a good act. Get land for the future. I heard from many of my colleagues that this is one competitive advantage. Because if we expect that one day we're going to have the infrastructure with highways, dawn, harbor, everything ready, we're going to wait that for a long, long time. So imagine now arriving here and going to a Swiss company, telling them that we have to buy land ahead of time. So what we did, we came with a master plan and say, okay, we are in the north, in the south, we have to be in east, we have to be in west, we have to be in northeast, whatever. And then we start to spot pieces of land where we could buy. And if we would not have had this kind of trust or make it more visible, it would be very hard for a Swiss company to buy land for a factory or a distribution center 5, 10 years ahead. But I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad I did it, because 4 years later, I see that 3 or 4 plots that we acquired, I would not construct anything there. But I'm sure in 5, 10 years, somebody will say, who was this crazy guy who bought this land in Northeast or Southwest, and so on and so forth. So this is a different model that I had to convince the center that is the way we do here. It's not like you find industrial parks everywhere. I'm sorry about that, but you don't find industrial parks everywhere. You go to Gujarat, and in 2 weeks we got the land. You go to Northeast, in 20 years you don't get the land. And that's the way it is.